President Trump posting on Truth Social, he will permanently pause migration from all third world countries. Joining us to discuss is Andrew Arthur, fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies and former immigration judge. So good afternoon, Andrew. Hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving holiday. So about what Trump said, what would the process look like legally? How would he enact such a pause in migration?
So what the administration would do, what the federal government would do is it would shut down visa consuling in certain countries. Individuals from those countries, when they apply for visas to come to the United States, they would find that their applications had been paused and that they wouldn't be allowed to obtain those visas in advance. And for those individuals who already have visas, when they show up at a port of entry, CBP would then turn them around. That's a slightly more legally difficult process. But thanks to something called the principle of consular non-reviewability, the president does have the ability to stop the immigration to the United States of any individual or individuals that he deems appropriate for any period of time that he deems appropriate. So he actually does have the power with respect to those individuals to come to the United States.
You know, Andrew, I can't help but think whether it's tariffs or anything else President Trump tries to do, there's always something that happens, like a bump in the road or something. Would there be some possible obstacles that he could potentially face, whether legally or otherwise?
So, yeah, I anticipate that if the president were to act on this plan, that advocates would go to court, would attempt to get a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction of that policy. Now, we saw something very similar under the first Trump administration when the president placed bars on the admission of immigrants from certain countries to the United States. That was the travel ban, or what the president's critics called a Muslim ban. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. Lower courts had actually blocked the president's proposal. But when it got to the Supreme Court found that the article of law that he used as the basis for that program oozed deference to the executive at every turn. And that was an actual direct quote from the decision. So the president actually has the authority. The question becomes whether, as a political matter, it's going to be popular, or whether it's one of those things that needs to be done on a large scale. I could definitely imagine that we need to do a better job of vetting people before they come to the United States, vetting people before they're granted asylum, and vetting people before they get green cards. But yeah, I think that what you're actually going to see is a much more tailored process than what the president is describing.
So, Andrew, let me ask you something specific about the post. It said that the government would denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility or are non-compatible with Western civilization. I'm wondering, is this legally a valid reason for stripping citizenship?
I think that what the president was referring to there, as the congressman had alluded to earlier, was individuals who had engaged in fraud in order to gain naturalization can be denaturalized. If you gain any immigration benefit through fraud, that benefit can be taken away from you, and that includes naturalization. But, simply denaturalizing individuals because, they have beliefs that are at odds with, other beliefs that other Americans have, that's a much more questionable legal issue. I think most people that have citizenship who have been sworn in, who didn't engage in fraud, are going to be able to will be able to keep that status. I think the courts would definitely knock down any attempt to take their citizenship from them. But I think that what you're going to see is a much more broader review of past naturalization grants to see if there were indicia of fraud, to do investigations, and then to denaturalize people. But yeah, there is a legal process for denaturalization, but it is extremely limited.
Okay. And the Trump administration is apparently looking at deporting the shooting suspect's family. So on what grounds could this be done legally if the family weren't involved in the crime?
So Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, if an individual carries out a terrorist attack, engages in terrorist activity, then not only that individual, but that individual's spouse and children are also removable from the United States. This is a very rarely used provision in the law, but it's one that's been in the law for 2 decades plus now. So the president does actually have the authority to do that. The Department of Justice, DHS, do have that authority. And in fact, if those individuals are taken into custody, they can't be released from custody, even if they didn't know anything about the terrorist attack. And this is, not to punish them, but more to give individuals who would think about engaging in terrorist activity pause before they do that. And I think that that's a pretty laudable goal.
Okay, Andrew, I just have one more thing. I'm wondering about this migration pause. So on an international level, some nations say the U.S. has an obligation to accept refugees and asylum seekers. So, does the U.S. have any obligation in this regard?
No, actually not. With respect to refugees, there is a provision in the law to bring refugees to the United States, but the executive branch has full discretion on which refugees should be allowed to come and in what numbers they're allowed to come. So, that itself is not actually going to be an issue if this is the way that the president decides to go. With respect to asylum, if an individual doesn't have any right to enter the United States initially, the United States isn't under any obligation to allow them to enter this country. Now, people could come illegally and apply for asylum that would be covered by this, but the federal government does have the authority to detain those individuals until they're actually granted asylum. And I think that this particular class of individuals would be subject to additional scrutiny, more vetting, things like that. So, I think that this is one of those things where, certainly on the margins, it's definitely legal. But I think that, the president is simply, expressing outrage at how many individuals unvetted were allowed to come to the United States under the last administration.
Well, all right, Andrew, I think that about covers it. Thank you for explaining this so clearly for us.